I'm having to relearn all of this physical stuff. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Climate Change Policy and Scrutiny Committee on Tuesday, the 8th of March. Welcome to you all. The first thing, if I remember rightly, from so long ago is housekeeping. The toilets are over here, and I think the emergency exit is through these doors and down the stairs. So moving on to that, do we have declarations of interest? Apologies. Oh, yes. Thank you. I'm glad you see this physical reality of meetings is quite a challenge. We have apologies from Councillor Perrett. And I don't think we have any others at this stage. Oh, right. Sean Gibbons. Okay. So Sean Gibbons, head of carbon reduction, isn't here either. Okay. So if we can move on to declarations of interest then. I'm not seeing anyone raising a hand. Thank you. The next thing are the minutes from the last meeting, which you will have had a copy of, pages 3 to 6 in the papers for the meeting. Does anyone have a comment or corrections or? No, I'm not seeing anything. So I will sign those and pass them on. Thank you. In which case we now move on to public participation. We've got 2 speakers. I can see that you're both very familiar with how long you have to speak and where you have to sit. So I'll just welcome you one after the other. Debbie, you have 3 minutes to address us. Yes.
So thank you, Chair. As you know, I'm very keen on climate jobs. And I'm also sharing with you something on that topic from a document called Road to Zero Carbon, a report by Shared Intelligence for Friends of the Earth and Ashton. They say in a paragraph on working with partners, local authorities making most progress to understand green job demand in their locality and therefore the longer term skills need are working closely with partners across education, industry, voluntary sector, trade unions, and with other local anchor organisations and neighbouring councils. May I remind you, Leeds scored rather better than you on the climate scorecards. The Centre for Alternative Technology suggests that councils can also deliver more by working sideways, leading by example to encourage others to act. I'll return to that point. This includes sharing their achievements to date with nearby councils, but I'd like to suggest that you should be bold enough to share ideas with local community groups, trade unions, and so on, because if you don't, people will think you don't care and it doesn't matter to you. So, you know, give that Climate Commission a kick up, encourage them to reach out more. There's lots more papers this meeting, so I'm going to be a bit selective. I picked out this CDP scorecard where you got a nice score for adaptation, which I gather means, you know, mopping up afterwards, and not such a good score on mitigation, which means stopping the problems happening in the first place by reducing your carbon. Back in 2019, you wanted granular baseline data, not somebody's pet project. I remember those words. But looking back, perhaps getting started on somebody's pet project would have got you going and shown that you meant business, that you wanted to tackle these issues. I feel that you've underused experts like Andy Gouldson.
30 seconds. Just
and also local enthusiasts. You know the organisation, the Bus Forum, the Cycle Campaign, the Citizen Food Assembly, the mandate that you got from a food assembly. I wanted to point out one or two odd things in this climate change strategy, like pressure on the NHS. I didn't understand where it was coming from, but it's all future tense. It's all maybes and maybes. You know, you've got access to experts, you've got access to very enthusiastic citizens, very concerned people. I wish you would use us.
Thank you very much for that.
Happy International Women's Week. I hope you'll show your faces before question time on Sunday.
Thank you, Debbie. And now I will call Jeff to come and address us.
This is gone. Good.
Yep.
I expect some of you, most of you, are aware of the Working Group 2 of the Climate Change Committee that's just reported. It paints a significantly worse picture than the Working Group 1, and I think there are structural and reasons for that. But we're in a mess, basically, and we're in a big mess. And I think it's time we told the public and you told your constituents, councillors, the truth about what's happening, and it is very bad. Part of telling the truth would be telling what the carbon footprints of the various areas you represent are. And I would like to point out that, for example, Cockmanthorpe has an average carbon footprint, the people there, according to work done by the Institute of Transport Studies in Leeds, which is 5 times that of people in the city centre. Now, I think people ought to know this. I think it ought to be publicised by the council so that possibly the people of Cockmanthorpe can argue that they've got it wrong. And within Cockmanthorpe, there will be a very wide range of carbon footprints from different households and individuals. If you look at the work that the Stockholm Environmental Institute did for Derwenthorpe a few years ago, you will find an enormous range from quite low carbon footprint to one that gets through the remaining carbon budget in a couple of years. And it will be nice to sort out exactly what the numbers are, and because the Department of Business say we're between 5 and 6 tonnes per person in the country. DEFRA say we're between 10 and 11. And I've left the book over there. Mike Berners-Lee says in this country we're about 13 tonnes, and they all count differently, and we all ought to know something of the background to this, particularly the relative carbon footprints of the low footprint people and the very high footprint people, and to help the very high footprint people to do better. Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
lots
Jeff.
of publicity, please.
Thank you, Jeff, and we'll no doubt be referring back to both of your contributions when we're debating the various issues. Okay, so I think I need to advise everyone it's being webcast. So getting to grips with this reality of being in the room. So just to advise everyone that people may be looking in. And then I will move on to the first item on the paper, the economic strategy. Are we getting a presentation slides, in which case, if you'd like to introduce yourself so that anyone watching knows who you all are, and let's go.
Thank you very much, Chair. Tracy Carter, I'm Director of Economy, Regeneration and Housing. I have to read it up because it's quite long. We're presenting today the key emerging themes from the engagement we've been undertaking on the New York Economic Strategy, and particularly highlighting where they kind of overlap and interrelate with the agenda of this climate change scrutiny committee. Just to remind you that we did actually undertake this presentation back at the January meeting, but on the basis that we've all slept a few times, we're going to run through that again, and then Simon will be taking questions either on the evidence base or on the key developing themes. So over to Simon.
Great.
Thank you for the opportunity to present again. We've had quite a few sleeps since the last meeting, and I've had my hip replaced since then as well. So I haven't had a huge amount of time to do a lot more work. I'll take you back through the report that we actually submitted some time ago. There are some things that changed within that, but I'm afraid I haven't had the opportunity to update the paperwork that's come out to you today. As we take you through the report, kind of how we've got to where we are in terms of the emerging themes for the economic strategy. The paper that you have before you this evening goes through a lot of the detail there and takes you through the findings of, for instance, the engagement that we've done through our big conversation exercise, which involved nearly 2,000 residents contributing, 100 businesses contributing their thoughts around a wide range of issues and how they interplay with the economy. I also have given you the most recent, at the time of publication, version of the evidence base for the economic strategy. A huge amount of data in there, which I won't go through in detail in this presentation, but happy to take questions on. And of course, also since the last meeting, we've had the government's Levelling Up white paper, which has actually set out government thinking in terms of the economy. And very helpfully takes a very similar evidence-based approach to what we presented. So if you look through the detail of the government's Levelling Up white paper, you'll see actually a lot of the data that we've presented in our evidence base, given at a national level within all of that. So we have our starting point, and I guess, as I said last time, the difference really between what we're doing with the economic strategy and where we are with a new climate change strategy is we have a long history of economic strategies in York. I've given you on that slide kind of 15 years worth of economic strategies from the Future York Group that reported back in 2007 through to the most recent economic strategy for 2016 to 2020. They were very consistent in terms of their approach to growing the economy of York. The focus was very much on how do we grow high value employment, working with our universities, with the hope that that drives up wages across the whole of the economy and makes the people of York better off. A big focus on how we find more ways for the graduates from our universities to stay in York, and also we make the most of the research that happens in our universities as well. And two key pieces of infrastructure: physical infrastructure in York Central, which is so important to the future of our economy and has been for a very long time as well. We're lucky to be presenting an economic strategy when this is about to happen, rather than when this is still something that we might like to see happening in the future. And getting that local plan agreed, which sets out so many of the parameters in terms of things like the amount of employment land available and where all that work happens. So some very consistent themes across those recent strategies. If we think about what we need to add to that, then that's very much informed by the engagement that we've been doing, and we're about to go into another phase of engagement as well. So I'll say that gives a quantum of who we've spoken to about 2,000 residents and 100 businesses through the phase one, our big conversation exercise. We worked with Citizens Advice to try and understand the experiences of their clients who are working and how they're experiencing financial hardship, and what that can tell us about some of the voices that we haven't heard previously in terms of economic strategies. As I say, very detailed evidence base, and I'm very happy to take questions on that, but I'm not going to go through, that's something like a half-an-hour presentation, so I will spare you that this evening. and a lot of engagement direct with business leaders and business owners through the COVID pandemic and beyond, with the business networks and sector roundtables that we've been running for the last couple of years, and are continuing to do so. Where do those things take us? Well, as those themes that we've had in our previous economic strategies around growing high value jobs, and I don't think anyone would argue that that's important to the city. Really, they highlight the need to get a grip on retail and tourism. So some of our big sectors that aren't high value in terms of high value of employment, but actually are really important to our city. How do we work with them? And instead of simply presenting them as bad things that don't pay enough and sectors which perhaps we would want to reduce, how can we work with those sectors in a more positive way to think about how they can actually provide better employment for the people who live in York? They are a fact of life in York, and they are some of the things that make our place a very special place. But they're not great sectors to work in if you really need to make enough money to keep a household. We know that's a real challenge. Flexible working to support informal care and work-life balance, really important in York. We have a city, as I can show you in the evidence base if you want to know more about this. And we have just as much full-time employment as every other city across the UK. But we have a lot more part-time employment that goes alongside that, because the challenges of living in York as a very expensive city mean that every household needs as much money as it can get. And that means that a lot more people work part-time in York than work elsewhere, not with fewer working full-time. So it's not a balance between the two. It's the nature of that part-time work, which of course is mostly focused in retail and tourism and social care. So it's mostly focused in sectors that don't necessarily pay very well, but providing really important flexible jobs that enable people to, as I say there, to support informal care, whether that's looking after children, whether that's looking after the elderly in society. We rely on a lot of people working part-time to be able to do those things, and they need to make enough money to live in our city. Are there more opportunities to get better part-time jobs, more suitable, flexible work in our city? Rail is York's forgotten sector at the moment. We're, as you have seen in multiple places, working really hard to try and bring Great British Rail's new headquarters to York, and really working hard with our education partners around what they do to support our rail industry, and trying to really build on what we have. Rail is a sector that doesn't leap out of the economic statistics because it's a very broad range of different things. It's not highlighted in government statistics it's not coded as rail. A lot of it's all in very different places. So bringing together that story that says a lot about our past and our present and our future in terms of employment, really important. And of course, green jobs and the bioeconomy, a really important part of our future. Some very interesting research around about green jobs and the bioeconomy, and a big focus in terms of our devolution asks as York and North Yorkshire. What does that actually mean in terms of York? How can we really turn that into jobs that mean there are more opportunities for the people living in your wards to get better employment, and get it beyond simply a headline around research that's happening at our university into something that can really make a difference to the people of York. So those are the opportunities we see to build on. And then these are the themes that which we're building our economic strategy around. So 4 headlines. I'll whiz through these. I'm conscious that we're already well into our stuck with time here. But an economy powered by good business, creating the right conditions for sustainable growth, a thriving workforce, and a globally connected city in all sorts of different ways. Now, within these 4 areas, we've then got 4 themes that we're working at the moment, and I've highlighted in green where I see the main crossover, and it's simply my views on this. I'd be very interested in your perspectives on this, of course. So an economy powered by good business, which has got a big focus on looking at the good business charter, but also thinking, well, what do we need to do to support businesses to decarbonise? A really important factor in terms of the climate change strategy, and also important from the economic strategy as well. It's both an opportunity for people to support other businesses and an opportunity for businesses themselves to decarbonise and contribute to net zero. how do we work with business leaders in their communities, and what can we do to produce more and better work experience to help people into the economy. So an economy powered by good business, working with businesses to grow the economy, creating the right conditions for sustainable growth. What can we do to work with local businesses and entrepreneurs to make sure they get the right kind of advice to grow, and to be more resilient, and to be prosperous, and ultimately to pay better wages. You know, the ultimate purpose of our economic strategy is to try and drive up household incomes, and that means people need to be paid more. Plain and simple truth. How do we place businesses at the heart of our citywide plans to develop the talent that they will need in the future and produce as many opportunities for the young people of York as possible? What can we do around access to quality work, good quality workspace, and what's needed to support business growth and job creation? That's actually a really interesting, fluid topic at the moment as we emerge from the COVID pandemic and try to understand what the new modern hybrid working patterns mean in the economy. What does that do to all sorts of things, from the need for workspace through to people's mobility and ability and need to get around, and then working with York's businesses as a community, trying to help them to build connections and build resilience within the business community itself. A thriving local workforce is around how we work with the people of York to make sure that they can get those jobs of the future and they've got the access to training and upskilling that they need. We get more people into higher level jobs and into science, technology and engineering jobs. As I said earlier on, how do we broaden those part-time job opportunities across the economy and create more career opportunities in some of those better paid areas? And as I said, how do we support the growth of green jobs? What do we mean by green jobs? What are the opportunities, and what can we do as a city council to support it, and what can the city do more generally to support the growth of opportunities in that sector? And then the fourth topic, a globally connected city. How do we support businesses to take advantage of new trade opportunities around the world and expand into new markets, actually, whether that's elsewhere in the world, elsewhere in the UK, elsewhere in Yorkshire? How do we make the most of the great links that there are within our city with the rest of the world, whether that's through businesses, whether that's through academia, or whether that's through civic links? And how do we leverage those for the benefit of trade, investment, and ultimately local job creation? That theme that's been a strong one in past economic strategies, how do we make sure we're working with our academics and our fantastic universities to bring in investment and create boost job creation with bioeconomy and rail as key sectors, as I'm sure you'll not be surprised to hear me say. And then finally, how do we act as a focal point for investment across the whole of the York and North Yorkshire region, make the most of our city's economic assets and our international recognition? And that's a real strong theme, as you can imagine, in the work that we're doing to try and land the GBR, Great British Rail headquarters in the city, but also well beyond that, how do we make sure that York Central really works to its maximum potential for the city? So those are the themes that are coming through in the economic strategy. I say there's a lot more detail in the reports I've given you as well. I'll stop sharing my screen at that point. I'm very happy to take any questions or thoughts that any of you have on those topics, on the broader evidence that I've presented you with the report, or in anything else that we've touched on there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, with the microphone pressed. So I've got a whole load of questions, and I'm keen to hear what other members would like to ask about. Yes, Councillor Melly.
Thank you. Yeah, that was very interesting. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think it was interesting that you have thought specifically about people who are having to work part-time because of the high cost of living, and fitting that around childcare or other caring responsibilities. But at the moment, it feels a little bit like if you are in that situation, the assumption is that the only jobs available are in the retail and hospitality sector, and you're kind of forced to work in that kind of low paid, insecure kind of work. I'm just wondering what work is being done to make sure that there is other forms of flexible work available so that people aren't being forced into that situation, which really just kind of perpetuates the gender pay gap and that sort of thing.
But
Yes,
I'll come back one at a time. Yeah, I mean, it's not that if you look at the at page 41, shows the split between full and part-time. I mean, I even have a problem with part-time as a phrase. Part-time is actually quite a pejorative term. We talk about people being part-timers as if they're not interested really. And the reality is that there are some great people with a lot of talent out there who need flexible work. If you look at where the part-time work is, that's the top of these columns, you'll see that in retail, health and social care and hotel and food sectors, and yeah, half or more than half of all employment is less than 30 hours a week, which is what we mean by part-time. And in admin and support, which I see largely people working for employment agencies, guess what in those sectors. In education, also a lot of people working part-time. But if you look at professional science and technical, it's not that there aren't any part-time opportunities there, it's just that there's only about a quarter of employment in those sectors is available in that flexible way. So there's something to start with there. The challenge, I think, is what can we do to grow the percentages, the flexibility that there is within all of these sectors, and how do we work with employers for them to understand that actually having nobody really works full-time now that we have a 24/7 economy. People might work 40 hours a week, but it's actually not very much as a percentage of the week and not very different from 30 hours a week. There are a lot of people are still stuck very much in I need somebody to be there 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. How can we work with employers to get them to think a bit more flexibly about the opportunities that being more open to different kind of employees might provide, recognizing that actually there is if you look at the percentage of people with high level skills in our economy, half the people in York have got something like a degree at level 4 above qualification, which is actually much higher than anywhere else. Half of the employment in New York is not at level 4 above kind of degree. So therefore, there are a lot of people working in part-time jobs who are actually overqualified. So how do we broaden the range of jobs that there are there, get employers to think a bit differently about who they are, how they fill some of the employment challenges they have? And as an example, I'd say, for instance, we've talked with Hiscox, the employment and insurance company in York. They used to have a whole series of jobs that they would recruit graduates into, and they found that people never stayed. It cost them a lot to keep replacing these people. Once they thought a bit differently and thought, actually, why don't we make these 25-hour week jobs, see if there's a different workforce out there. They found that instead of getting 21-year-olds straight out of university, they're getting 30-year-olds who needed a different kind of flexible employment. And actually, they found they don't have that problem recruiting into those jobs anymore, and they've got a committed workforce that really want to work with them. So how can we work with some of those great examples that there are to encourage more employers to offer and think a bit differently about how they can work?
If I could just come in on that one, I think we've got a real opportunity in the current economic market where it is, it's a very rare thing, but it's a seller's market in the jobs market at the moment. Everybody's having difficulty recruiting skilled staff to do jobs, and I think employers are now having to be much more pragmatic and imaginative about how they recruit the skilled workforce that they need, and that gives a real opportunity for people who, because of other responsibilities, as you say, care responsibility, either for children or for older people, need a little bit more flexibility about when and how much work they do. And I think that creates a real opportunity to push up the level of wage that can be earned by a part-time worker. And I think the second trend that we're experiencing post-COVID is the geographical tie of where you live and where you work has been broken. We've all spent 2 years at home, and you could have been at home anywhere in the country. I think that has proven the model of hybrid working, which also means that your reach as a skilled part-time worker is much greater geographically. You're not restricted to working within the commuting distance of your place of employment. So I think there's plenty of opportunity there. It does come down to employers about whether or not they are imaginative enough to see the value that part-time workers can give to their businesses. And that's something that we've been working with FSB and the Chamber of Commerce to say, this is a real opportunity here for you to grasp a skill pool, a talent pool that's currently not necessarily being visible at those levels. So,
thank you for that. Yes, if you want to come back on it, and then
thank you. Yes, you said that a lot of hows there. How do we go about working with employers? How do we go about creating these opportunities? Are there any answers to how yet, like in the economic strategy?
Well, the economic strategy is for the city, it isn't for the council. So it's as much going to be a strategy for the businesses and the business organisations who are based in the city. And then the next phase of consultation that we want to go through really gets to the nub of that one, so that I think, let's not pretend that the council can change the jobs available in the city. That's not our role. We don't have the power to do that. We will have to work with business organisations and businesses themselves to be able to deliver on any of these ambitions within here. And it's about exposing the data. It's about exposing the opportunity, and it's about working with educational establishments to upskill people so that they can maximise their earning potential. But there are no, I can't tell you that action point 32 in the economic strategy is going to tell you how the council is going to make more high-paid temporary work way above my powers and ability. But it's about identifying that as an opportunity for the city, and using the data that we've got to be able to have a much better understanding of what makes our economy tick, and therefore what levers we might be able to apply to maximise the benefits and deliver on some of these objectives. It is soft influencing work. It's rather than kind of hard powers.
yes, and if it can be relatively brief, because we've got a lot to get through.
Sorry,
We've
yes,
got
absolutely.
2 whole strategies to get through.
Absolutely. I'd just say the how is the approach is the important thing there, and what we've developed through the COVID pandemic is a much closer relationship with the business community, very regular meetings with business networks, a whole series of sector roundtables where we're talking to some of the key employers in the city in a way that we haven't done in the past. And what we have to avoid with this is the kind of, we'll write a leaflet and send it to all the HR departments and try and hector them into doing what we want them to do. This has got to be a process of working together with the business community to see how they can, and it's not you ought to be doing this because it'd be good for the city. The reality is there's an opportunity here for businesses to think differently about how they recruit and to take advantage of a real key element of the York economy, which is a very highly skilled workforce, including a significant number of people who don't want to work 40 hours a week. Now, if you look at some, I think we said earlier on when we were in what came through our big conversation, is that 40% of those people who work part-time because that's what they want and need to do. It suits them. There's still a number of people there who would rather have a full-time job, but a lot of those people working part-time, and it's something like 30,000 people in York working less than 30 hours a week. 40% of those do so because they need to fit the work around the rest of their responsibilities. So there's immediately employers thinking, where can I get more good recruits from? Well, think differently about what you're advertising and think about how you can take advantage of that pool of talented people in York who want to work 25 hours a week, and let's see what difference can we make. And then work with those who find success in that to promote that and get an understanding what the advantages are. But it's got to be around a win-win and about why this is good for the business community as well as it's good for our economy.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to move over to Councillor Baker. And I also want to just try and keep everyone focused on the role of this committee, because we can discuss the economic strategy for the city as an economic strategy in its own right. But I think we should be trying to focus on how that interacts with the climate change strategy. If I can just suggest that. And Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Chair. I'm struggling to bring my point into what you just said.
Right, okay.
But I'll skip. And
well, I'll give you time to regroup, and I'm sorry, but it is so easy because these are vast strategies to get bogged down. So I'll in a second, if that's all right, Councillor Melly. I'll just start by kind of trying to exemplify in this document why it is I've said what I've just said. In paragraph 4, we hear about ensuring that economic growth in York is both inclusive and sustainable. Now, to my ears, I get warning bells when I ring that, when I read that, because I know, and I think we all know, that people use the word sustainable in all sorts of different ways. And it's very easy to think, well, I mean environmentally sustainable, so that's what this document means. And I'm not sure that's what this document means. So I'd like to hear why it doesn't say creating the right conditions for environmentally sustainable growth, rather than just sustainable growth, because simply ensuring that, you know, this year 50,000 people are employed, next year 50,000 people are employed, you can argue that's sustainable, but it doesn't address the issues that this committee is interested in. So I'd just like to know, why aren't we having the words environmentally in that phrase?
Absolutely accept the challenge. It's a discussion that Simon and I have had about how upfront and clear we are about using the economy to meet our zero carbon targets. I think that the term sustainable growth is about the level of expectation you have about endless exponential growth, that not being a sustainable model for the planet any more than it is for the economy. It's a kind of bigger container, but we would be really happy to have your input as a scrutiny committee as to just whether or not we need to be a bit more direct about articulating that.
Thank you. Yes, well, I mean, I'd like to have other people's thoughts on it, but I certainly think there are a number of areas in this document where the environment could be stated and isn't stated. And in the slides you showed us, I was interested in the slides. There was a particular slide about the priorities. And on the slide, Simon, you had, under priority 3, you had support growth of green jobs. But in the document, it doesn't mention green jobs. And in priority 1, it says more work experience, internships and apprenticeship opportunities created to enable young talent to thrive. And from where I'm sitting on the Climate Change Committee, the missing part of that is, in order to tackle the drive towards a zero carbon York. Because if all we're talking about is enabling businesses to thrive and not keeping a focus on the fact that 62% of our carbon emissions are in buildings and they include industry, unless our economic strategy directly addresses how we're going to create a skilled workforce in order to be able to tackle insulation and retrofitting of buildings, then I'm not sure the economic strategy is properly facing the climate change strategy. So I don't know if you've got thoughts on that and how we could do more to bring these two documents so they're properly talking to each other.
That's the process that we're going through right now, actually. We're working on bringing together the two strategies, and Claire will talk later on in this meeting about this process, to bring the two strategies together under one umbrella through, first of all, executive and then ultimately to full council later on in the year, to show how these two strategies are working hand in hand and not working at loggerheads, which I think in the past has been where environmental sustainability and economic growth have looked in very different directions. We want to try and look in the same direction together and to harness both the strategies.
Good.
You
Well, no,
highlight
I'm
some of the
glad to hear
challenges.
that, and I hope the documents will eventually show that. And there was
Yeah.
another point where you mentioned leisure, I seem to remember. There was about work and leisure. And again, in this committee, we've spoken about this on various occasions. And I think we're all aware of the fact that if you're going to have a low carbon leisure future for this city, the economy has to be involved in creating leisure opportunities for local residents to be able to have a great time in York rather than hopping on a plane to go to Bali. So again, you know, it's that knitting it together. But Councillor Melly, sorry, you've been waiting patiently.
Thanks, Chair. I think that climate justice and social justice are really closely linked, and we need a just transition to a low carbon economy. And I think that when we're coming up with plans of how to have a carbon net zero city with a thriving economy, we need to think about how marginalised communities are going to be impacted by that, and especially in York, where we do have a lot of people on low incomes and insecure work. But I take your point, and I'll stick to a more directly related question, which was in the kind of report on the key findings from the engagement and stuff that you've been doing. There's quite a lot about transport in there, both from kind of residents talking about how they travel, whether it's to and from work, or if they're working from home, or when they're shopping and shopping heavy items and that sort of thing. And that says also from your business survey, there was questions about transport as well, and local businesses highlighting local transport connections as a weakness and that sort of thing. But I couldn't see anything about kind of freight and stock delivery and that sort of business related transport. Did you have any feedback on that, or does it come into the plans at all?
We didn't get anything specifically from our big conversation exercise, which was very much a conversation with the residents of York about this. But you obviously, yeah, I mean, very clearly for businesses, there's the transport of their staff getting to and from work, and then there's how they bring their supply of goods and supplies to their premises, and how do they get whatever it is they produce out of York. So yeah, absolutely important aspects, and I'm sure they are things that we will look in more detail on when we go into the next phase of consultation.
That's another one of those triangulated things between the strategies that we're trying to keep running in parallel. So the local transport plan will have a significant section on freight and its impact, and its carbon impact on the city and how to decarbonise freight structures, particularly the last mile element of it, which is you know, it's an issue for us as regards the operation of our city centre as well. So that's quite a complex issue. It's not come at us through public consultation, where it's got a clear line through to the LTP. But what we're just doing at the moment is like taking notes of how you actually want to see the complex mesh of links articulated through this plan, and then it's down to that kind of tripartite relationship between the three strategies. But we'll capture that one as well. It's quite useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Chair. So in support of what you said about you're working on the two strategies coming together, and they're going to be published together. I'm just asking, because you've said that they'll be brought to full council for approval in June 2022. So it'd be really good to have clarity as to whether that is going to happen, or perhaps if it's actually July 2022 because of when full council is. And what I would hate to see is that for some reason the climate change committee got delayed because of the climate change strategy got delayed because of the economic strategy for any reason, because we do need it published on the website as soon as possible, because then our scorecard rating will shoot up to 80% like it's supposed to be. And as the public speaker said, and as we've heard before, one of the reasons it's very low on our climate score is because it's not published on the website. So do we have that date in stone?
Yeah, but Claire's holding the ring on trying to corral us all to the same.
Yeah, so it's going to executive in June for executive to recommend that full council adopt it on the 14th of July. Okay. But in reality, that means it's published in What, yeah, I don't know, the 12th of June or something like that. So, so yes, it will be published on a website around about the 12th of June, but as a paper for executive, which executive then recommend it gets adopted by full council, which gives full council the opportunity to speak to it, a bit like you are now, really. So yeah, and so far, touch wood, it's all going together, and we've got quite a vigorous, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm skipping to my agenda item, but it's got quite a vigorous engagement and refinement process, because we need as many parts of the city to engage in the actual ambitions set out in the two strategies as possible, because actually it's not our strategy, it's not the council strategy, it is the city strategy. And just as Tracy and Simon were saying, it's about soft influence and skills. Part of that engagement process is to bring the city with us, resident, business, institution, whoever, to sort of recognise their role in that. So we could publish it tomorrow, but that doesn't mean that anybody would ever do anything with it. So we deliberately want to go through quite an extensive refinement process with them.
Thank you for that. I'll throw another idea forwards, if I may. In paragraph 8, it says that it's recognised that the number of firms participating can't be taken as wholly representative. And elsewhere, Simon, I think you've just said we've got a close relationship with the business community. And I'm keen to understand how we think we can lift that up to the next level, because we've had the same question with the climate change, the big conversation. We all have to kind of be concerned, don't we, that if we can't get businesses to participate in surveys, what makes us think we'll get them to participate in the climate action that we want to see after all this is done? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we can transform that communication with business, in your view, to incentivize engagement. And what I mean by that is, I know that in other cities, certainly in Europe, I'm not sure about this country, but I'm sure they must exist here as well. There's a lot more partnership working, because if this strategy for climate change and for the economy are to work together, we know that we're going to have to transform the buildings in York, the business premises in our city centre, for example. In other cities, they create partnerships to enable, for example, shops to transform the glazing on their buildings. So shop fronts become triple glazed. Do you think there's a role in this strategy declaring as part of its ambition the determination to set up those kinds of partnerships to enable businesses to decarbonize, rather than simply saying we want it to happen? Because once we get the carbon pathway that's got to take us to zero carbon, everyone's got to be on board, and we've got to find ways of persuading business to be part of that. So it's what can we do in this strategy to signal that the council is looking to businesses being part of that pathway to a zero carbon future. And this is how we envisage making a journey towards it. Sorry if that's a big, huge statement.
Great question. And a starting point, alongside the strategy, what we want to do is put together a new economic partnership for the city. But that's not entirely an answer to that question, because in the past, our economic partnership has been 12 people that meet in a room. And actually, there are, it depends how you count, 7,000, 12,000 businesses in York. And neither strategy will be successful if only 12 people are involved. Beyond the, and you're right, a very small number, relatively small number of businesses got involved in filling in a survey on the internet. Again, that activity in itself, what does that achieve? It gives us some information. We've had much more success in engaging with businesses and getting them involved when we've been talking about topics which are actually live concerns for them. So obviously throughout the pandemic, businesses wanted to know what support there was and help there was available from the council and from the government. We were a big conduit to that. We've worked with hundreds of businesses and we're doing our best to continue that conversation. So we now have a business bulletin that goes out every week to the business community in York. It goes out to nearly 2,000 businesses in the city. That's a level of engagement which we've never seen before in terms of the ability of us to have a direct communication with businesses. Alongside that, we're working very closely with the Federation of Small Businesses, who we've helped get their membership over 1,000 in York. That's, you know, a really high percentage of small businesses in York being part of the FSB. We work very closely with the bid, and of course all the businesses in the city centre have to be part of the bid and are very interested in that because they put money into it. A really key organisation for us to work with to be able to speak with businesses. And we work with the Chamber of Commerce as well, who also represent a significant number of businesses in the city. And you're right, it's got to be not, as I said earlier on, it can't be about, we want you to do this. The council insists that businesses behave in a different way. We want people to do different things. It's got to be a conversation about how we work together to achieve some really important objectives for the city, but in a way that actually are good for businesses. You know, that's what we need. It's not a strategy that says, oh, businesses, you've all got to put hair shirts on. This is all going to be really difficult. This has got to be about how we can help businesses to be more successful in the future, and not just successful at making as much money as possible, but as successful playing their part more broadly in society.
Do you think that this strategy document could include something to that effect?
Yeah.
The council is looking to find partnership models to incentivize business.
Yeah.
That we see our enabling role, or our role as a catalyst. You know, with my energy company, they send me an email every month saying, tell us how much energy you've used and you can spin a wheel and maybe you've won 20 quid. I just wonder the degree to which we have in some way got to start thinking about how we bring those people on board, not by offering them 20 quid on spin a wheel, but by showing them that engaging positively with this agenda will unlock opportunities for them, so that if they're spending 10,000 quid a year on their energy bill, by working with us, we can find ways of helping them have access to, say, cheaper glazing, triple glazing for the front of store, that will save them on their energy bill. And by doing it as a city, we reduce the cost of doing that, decarbonise, reduce their electricity bills going forwards. For me, an economic strategy would seem to suggest that we need to be doing that. So are you confident that by the time we reach the end of this draft, that we'll be able to tackle those kinds of issues?
I think it's always a challenge how far deep you can get into the practicalities of what you can offer. But I think we need to get towards that, don't we? Sorry, Claire.
Yes, Claire, and
So,
then
I think what you've just described is one of the alignment pieces we need to do. So there's absolutely a role for businesses to play in delivering the net zero ambition. There's a discussion about whether how much of that information sits in an economic strategy, or how much of Simon as the head of economic growth should influence the net zero strategy to make sure that we recognise the role that businesses play. And that's part of the alignment piece that's going on right now. So it's absolutely something that needs to happen. We just need to work out the best mechanism to do that, because it would be the relationships the relationships that Sean, as head of carbon reduction, and myself have with, for example, the Sustainability Leads Group, the Chamber, FSB, all the other networks, have to help them understand the role that they can play in net zero. So, you know, when we met last time, we talked about I can't remember the funding, but where there's local energy plans, local area energy planning, and the opportunity for somebody like the bid maybe to come together and work out on how to facilitate better energy deals for city centre businesses. Now that's for us to do in the carbon reduction team, but it's definitely something that needs to be indicated through the economic growth team and the economic strategy, because it has a net relationship with the economic growth of those particular businesses and their sustainability, I suppose, from a financial sustainability model. I think there's an opportunity now as well, just to mention it, that energy prices are, you know, we have a problem with energy prices. So actually there's an opportunity for us to actually do some of this work maybe a bit earlier.
Yes, and I'll just say 2 words and then pass on to Councillor Baker, because it relates to what Councillor Melly said earlier about, you mentioned poverty and climate justice. And in economic terms, as energy bills go through the roof, there is a negative impact on small businesses. And a lot of those small businesses pay the minimum wage. And what we don't want to see are businesses going to the wall because energy prices are going up and we're not helping them to manage the transition towards more energy efficient buildings. But I'll pass over to Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I think Claire just sort of answered my question, having mentioned the Sustainability Leads group, because when you were asking about partnerships and the council taking a lead in setting up partnerships, of course, we did that with One Planet York, who the council no longer leads or supports. But I do believe that One Planet York are a part of the Sustainability Leads group. So that's fine. So I don't need to go back to Simon and say, well, you should also speak to One Planet York because they are already where they need to be. Great.
Are there any more?
I think the key on the economic strategy is that we're not writing something into the economic strategy which drives the kind of growth that's going to challenge our zero carbon ambitions, and we're doing everything that we can to support the climate change, and that's how those things should interrelate. Same on transport. You know, we will be using our links to businesses to encourage them to have sustainable transport planning as part of the strategic set of documents, and all of that is linked to that theme that we've got within here, which is about doing good business. It's about encouraging businesses to have an ethical framework within which they do that is cogent and consistent with that set out by the city, so we have businesses that are aligned to our strategic objectives.
Yeah, that makes a great deal of sense. And Simon said earlier about not wanting to beat people up and punish them for not doing stuff. And the role of this strategy is surely to lift people up and inspire them that there is a vision for the city and that the local authority is keen to help enable these changes to happen and to use the power we have and the voice we have with national government to help and other players to help bring that. Are there any other comments from people on this? I'm not seeing any more, so thank you very much for that, and I hope it's been helpful to you to get some feedback from us.
Thank you, that's been really helpful, and lots of things we can take on board there, Chief.
We look forward to seeing a further iteration. And it's good to see you back on your feet as well, I must say, Simon.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
Councillor. It's good to be back on my feet.
Thank you. Okay, so we now move on to the second part of this jigsaw. I hope we'll get some way into it, Councillor Fisher, before you have to depart. The climate change strategy. Yes.
So thank you, Chair. I've brought to you today a recovery report and 4 annexes, and those 4 annexes cover a list of contents that will be in the climate change strategy, a presentation about where we are with the strategy altogether, which I'll run through shortly, some information about CDP, which our speaker picked up on, and the process of alignment that we've also touched on, so we might need to not need to go too much detail there. So the thing I want to draw your attention to in the cover report is actually about solar for schools, because we're not picking that up in any of the other reports, so that's a separate item covered in the cover report. Solar for Schools is a national programme. It's run, it's already working with over 200 schools. It's all fully funded and essentially puts in place 25-year agreements covering all the liabilities, including removal and replacement of solar panels if required, that allows schools to basically manage their energy costs so that they're much more self-sufficient essentially. Across York, York schools, or York maintained schools, I should say, release around 955 tonnes of carbon emissions a year, pretty high. We've already had one school come forward. The Clifton Green Primary First School has is our first Solar for Schools partner. There's added benefits that the Solar for Schools programme provides the different schools with education and awareness of energy and solar power, which is really exciting actually for the school children and obviously their parents to get involved and understand about sustainable education and sustainable energy. We've already got 10 other schools interested. The Assistant Director of Education and Schools has got full delegation to approve and agree all of the agreements as different schools come forward. Obviously, you already know that the council purchased 100% renewable energy, or sorry, electricity, but these solar panels will reduce energy costs for schools and then provide opportunities for learning about sustainability. So a great opportunity for schools. And I suppose the reason I wanted to highlight today was just to say, any of the schools that are interested, please just let us know. This is really an ongoing live programme that will work with as many different maintained schools as we can. So if I can just move on to the first paper, contents. Let me just open it up myself on my screen. Here we go. So the list of contents really just tells you the scope and the breadth of information covered. It's a report. The breadth, it's Annex A, by the way, if anybody, yeah. The breadth and scope of information that the climate change strategy will cover will come on to things like the principles and the emissions data and the evidence base behind it, but you can see the full range of information we're planning to cover, including objectives such as breaking them down for buildings, for transport, for waste, natural environment, etc., etc. We're going to cover the co-benefits, which is your sustainable development benefits of the economic benefits, the social benefits, and then of course the environmental benefits associated with climate change, because we all know it's not an island. It has a direct impact on placemaking and living and working in places as a whole. There's a series of case studies, again, very happy to include additional case studies. And these are listed in the contents. They will actually be interspersed throughout the body of the strategy itself. And then we talk about next steps. And of course, we've included a glossary. So very happy to take questions initially about Annex A. Hello.
Yes. Councillor Baker.
Sorry, left my mic on. Yeah, just a quick question. I know you've put city partners under who's going to be a partner signatory.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that will be a list of several city partners. Will there be someone there? It could be anyone that is a member of the public. We could ask one of our public speakers, or somebody that does represent the citizens' assembly that took place, so that it covers the public.
That's a really good idea. Can I take that away and think about how we might make that fair? So yes.
Well, there was the Citizens' Assembly that took place in York Explore right before we even, I think, possibly right after the climate emergency declaration.
Yeah.
So that they would be a good place to start. Who was the author of that mandate? I can't tell you off the top of my head, but we can find out.
No, that's fine. I can dig into that. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor.
In terms of case studies, and given what we've just been discussing with the economic strategy, do you envisage the economic strategy having case studies in it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. Yeah.
Good. So certainly I can say that in the documents I've seen in various cities around Europe, the ones that are most interesting to read are the ones that give you lots of practical stuff to feed your mind about what is possible. So the idea of interspersing what is essentially a complex technical document with practical case studies, I think is certainly a very good one. And in terms of what might be added to the list you've got, one springs to mind really because I think we need our case studies to also be things that people wouldn't dream of being relevant. And I'd like to just remind people of the rubberized road stuff that's been happening in the past year, because ultimately you're laying tarmac on a road, but you're cutting the emissions from laying the tarmac by 5% by using a different material. when you look at a whole city and the amount of work that's done, those kinds of things are the quiet instrumental changes that cities make to show leadership. So there are probably others that, others among us are familiar with, but I'd love to see that kind of stuff tucked into it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Add another couple of comments. I've just noticed that there was something to add in the building section, if possible, that we're talking about reducing emissions from new buildings, but we really need to emphasize the need to reduce demand for and use of energy in all our buildings. And so I would hope that actually the last point in the building section where it says make our buildings climate resilient, although to us, we would hope that it implies by being climate resilient, we're reducing our use of energy. But I think for people, for climate education, it's really important to keep saying we need to reduce what we use. We need to use less energy in all our existing buildings, not just new buildings or reducing emissions. It's just using less in everything we do. And one other quick addition, I don't know much about this, but in the energy supply section, could we add making the local grid fit for purpose?
I'm not sure if we've got the power to do that. It doesn't sound like we probably have, but we are remember developing a local area energy plan at the moment. So maybe it's about bringing the local area energy plan into the climate change strategy rather than having it as an action to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly think that makes sense. Because it's part lifting people up to see that we are thinking about the whole picture. And the strategic document doesn't go into detail on it, but at least it flags it all, doesn't it? And for that reason, I'd like to have considered, I'm not seeing it, maybe it's because I'm just not looking in the right place, but the issue of leisure and culture is part of all of this. As I was saying earlier, the opportunities you have to enjoy cultural activities need also to be brought into the ambit of how we reduce carbon emissions. So I'm not quite sure how it fits into this.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's an alignment piece with the economic strategy. So I'll take that away and we'll have that
think
discussion.
about where it goes.
Yeah,
yes.
or whether it's in the health and wellbeing strategy that's not being developed yet. So it's a point we'll keep and work out the best place to put it.
Are there any other points people? Oh, yes, Councillor Fisher.
I think the section on buildings, switching to low carbon appliances is a critical area. Just to give you a simple example, about 4 years ago, my tumble dryer decided to die. In the summer, I put my washing out on the line. In the winter, it's not practical. I know there are a lot of houses that haven't got the ability to have outside space. The tumble dryer I bought was a heat pump tumble dryer. And I worked out the actual cost per load goes from about £1.40 down to about 43p. So, okay, I only wash about once, twice a week, but it makes a colossal difference in terms of the amount of energy it uses because the heat pump takes heat from within the house and it doesn't even vent any steam into the atmosphere. It keeps the heat within the house economy. Now, they cost more, but I reckon it's paid for itself. And the other great advantage, of course, is no risk of them ever catching fire, because they work at low temperatures. Now, how we can encourage people to, who can afford to, or whether there is some system the government could introduce which subsidises those because they are significantly less of a demand for those people who rely on tumble dryers. That's just one example. Low carbon appliances, low energy appliances can make a colossal difference and help to tackle fuel poverty as well.
Yeah. And the point you've just made about fuel poverty, and it goes back to what Councillor Melly has just said earlier, I think it would be good to have as one of the principles here, acknowledging the fact that what we're also trying to do is address fuel poverty and climate justice. Because it's not just about the economy, it's not just about carbon emissions, it's also about ensuring that our community are all included in this. Sorry, Councillor Melly.
Sorry, I was going to say something, but I've changed my mind because I think it's not quite on topic.
Ah, okay. So Councillor Fisher has to go. Sorry, are there any other? Did I misunderstand what you just said there?
No, I just agreeing with Councillor Baker, really. Like, I think other organisations are encouraging people to think about how they use energy and what appliances they use, not just how to change your appliances to be lower energy. Same with cars, right? You don't, if you need a car because of a disability or something, then fair enough, switch to an electric car if you can. But what actually we need is a cultural shift into using less. And actually, I think when it comes to things like tumble dryers, I mean, I've never used a tumble dryer in my life, but I think there's quite a big correlation between having a tumble dryer, well, the opposite of a correlation between having a tumble dryer and needing a tumble dryer. Generally, if you can afford a tumble dryer, you've got the space to hang clothes on a line or inside the house. And if you don't have space because you're in housing poverty and you don't have any space, you probably can't afford a tumble dryer. And it's
So it's about finding a new term that is the same as modal shift in transport. We need a climate friendly, catchy modal shift to say to, but you can call it modal shift, but that's to do with transport. So if we could like slot in something that makes what you said speak to people about living, encouraging residents to live in a climate resilient way. But yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense to you? Yes. Okay, in which case, do you want to move on to the next section?
Yes, thank you. So the next section is a series. The next section is a series of slides, which is about the climate change strategy itself. It provides some evidence around the emissions which led to the objectives. It talks you through the core principles, which picks up on our climate justice point, so we can make sure that's strong enough, or we need to strengthen it. And then it gives you some stakeholder perspectives and then walks you through the case studies. Can we go to the front, do you think, Richard? Sure. Can we get to the first slide, which is, oh, not that one. Not one. Oh, does it? Might do. Yes, look at that. Sorry, excuse me, whilst I just whizzed through. Right, so climate change strategy. We've talked before about the climate change strategy, and we've shared some of this information before at a high level, and this is much more detail. So this gives you an idea of scatter. So just to remind people listening, I just wanted to remind everybody what scatter stands for. So scatter is the tool for local authorities aiming to standardise the reporting of greenhouse gases. This is our scatter report from 2018. Scatter stands for setting city area, target, trajectories, then emissions and reduction. It looks at particularly scope 1, which is our direct emissions, and scope 2, our indirect emissions, because it obviously can't measure those that are further away from us and our wider impacts, such as out of boundary transport or out of boundary waste. The point to note really is, and you'll see this is 2018, which is our most recent data. So data is typically 2 to 3 years old. We, along with a lot of other local authorities, are trying to sort of lobby to get that brought forward, because obviously with a target for 2030, what that really means at the moment is that's 2032, because we won't know in 2030 if we've actually met our emissions. So just moving on to the next slide. This just gives you a breakdown of where those emissions are coming from. So we've said before that nearly 62% of emissions in York come from buildings. So our carbon hungry, beautiful heritage city buildings, but also commercial buildings occupy 8.6%, and industrial buildings and facilities like warehouses and factories, that's 14.2%, which again, I mean, it was picked up earlier, but that is where there's a direct relationship with the economic strategy and the work that we need to do with local businesses to help improve the carbon efficiency of their own facilities. Residential buildings are around about 31.8%. So you can see across all tenure, social housing, owner occupied, whatever, it is high, higher than transport actually. So transport represent 27.9% of all of our emissions, 26.8% from on-road, 0.7% from diesel rail and 0.3% from off-road. So relatively low for rail and off-road, but as you can see, relatively high for on-road transport.
Can I interject just for the public who may be seeing this, so that it's understood that in October 2019, when this committee held its first meeting, we did not have access to this level of data at all.
No.
And it's a mark of all the work that's been done on the council and by our head of carbon reduction and the team to finally be at a point where we can start seeing our carbon reductions. And it's a huge step forward. I just want to make sure that's understood.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. That is a point that we do need to make because, of course, all of the programmes that we've developed to tackle carbon reduction have not had this information, so haven't necessarily been pointing in the right directions. But now we've got this, this will absolutely inform our strategy and our plans going forward. Again, it's worth noting that the other three areas all are relatively low actually when compared with transport and buildings. Buildings is without doubt the biggest area to look at. And I've got a graph in a minute that shows that in sort of stark reality. Just staying on this slide for a little bit longer though, 2.6% from livestock and land use. So 2.6% from land use and actually minus 0.8% from land use itself. Sorry, livestock 2.6, land use 0.8. Remember, we're not rural, so that will be different in different areas and we don't really have large areas of rural landscape, and with our woodlands and our grasslands, that's actually acting as a kind of offsetting really sequester. 2.7% from waste disposal, and then 5.7% from industry itself. So that includes heavy industry, iron and steel and chemicals, which actually for York is relatively low because we don't really have that type of industry across the city. And again, it's worth noting that this is the standard way of measuring local authority emissions, which means if you looked at North Yorkshire, for example, our nearest neighbours, you'd have a different percentage mix given that they have different sort of circumstances around them. So just moving on, what that means for us is if we are going to hit our target and the best chance of getting our target so that we do everything that we possibly can in these different areas, that will reduce our emissions by 54% set against 2019 levels. But what we need to do is reduce our transport emissions by 71%. I'll just hold that thought for a minute because that is massive. We need to reduce our industry emissions by 63%, domestic buildings over half, waste 41%, non-domestic 37%, agriculture 12%. So they are our targets for us to get to 54% of our gross emissions by compared to 2019 levels, which you can see means that we are not going to reach a 2030 net zero target if we continue on our high ambition pathway. So what the climate change strategy will set out to do is what can we do with emerging technology, emerging opportunities, emerging policy and lobbying the government so that we can reach our net zero by 2030. Does anyone do you want me to take questions at the end or?
Well, I'd like to make a comment again before we go on, and I'm happy to hear what others think, but these are really important moments for this city because in February of 2020, this committee stated clearly, well, it stated it before that, but we persuaded council to agree that you can't manage what you can't measure. And absolutely fundamental to achieving climate, the carbon zero that we seek to reach, is understanding how big the challenge is. And what you're articulating, Claire, there begins to give us real clarity, where previously I think it was possible for people to say, oh, it's easy, or people to say it's impossible and everything else. But now we're finally in a position to begin to grasp what is an absolutely massive nettle. So I don't know. Yes.
Yeah, just a question. Does the 54% that we need to get down, does that include, like, factor in the anticipated behaviour change? Because I'm just wondering what this gross emissions, we need to get gross emissions down. So does that mean that would that figure change? Oh no, hang on. Yeah, if so suddenly, you know, our behaviour, our transport behaviour was improved exponentially, would these figures change?
Yes.
Right.
So these figures are based, these figures that show the downward trajectory. If we did everything that we know we can do today,
Yeah.
then we can get transport down by 71% and industry down by 63%. And that will contribute to gross emissions coming down by 54%.
Okay.
But there are things that we don't know, or things that we know that could be happening soon, like hydrogen heat pumps generally, those sorts of things that actually might make a difference. We could lobby government to do other things. With energy prices going, you know, the crisis there, that might unlock opportunity that hasn't happened yet. Because actually, in the world of energy manufacturing and energy innovation and transport innovation, 8 years is a long time.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't lost faith. We're just aware of what we need to do, and we're a bit more, we're more focused on what needs to happen.
Okay, thanks.
And hopefully we can begin to grapple with the sums involved.
Yes.
Because when we see domestic buildings 56%, we know that we've got 90,000 homes in this city. If it costs £30,000 to retrofit each one of them, that's £2.7 billion we have to face, we have to find. And the scale of the challenge, I think now we're beginning to get this proper data together. The scale of the challenge becomes clearer, and there's a lot of facing up to do. And whether local authorities can do this, whether government can do it, whether businesses have to work to make it happen, that's the next stage. But certainly, I have to say, I'm heartened that we're now at least dealing with the scale of the emissions that currently exist, and therefore beginning to be able to wrestle with the challenge we face. Whether we can do it by 2030 is something that there will be many opinions on, and I'm happy to hear anyone's thoughts around the table. Are there any more comments? Yes, Councillor Long.
Sorry, just my final point was that this really helps us prioritise on where we need to put our efforts. So we prior to this data, we were doing whatever we could, wherever we could. Now this is telling us where we need to focus and where we put our resources, where we put our funding, and where we make sure we can make the maximum impact.
Councillor Wong.
Thank you. I mean, I am pleased that we've got some data to work off, but we don't have any idea how we're going to do these things. Are we just hoping that society will change and that we will reap the benefits, or what can we as a council and as a city do to actually make sure we go down this route?
So this climate change strategy discussion is in 2 stages, because I didn't want to bring everything to you all at once. This is the discussion about the evidence base, the stakeholder feedback, and kind of the scale of the challenge. And then when we meet in April, which is only a few weeks, you'll have the full strategy. And one of the things I wanted to ask, actually, under urgent businesses, if I can, am I allowed to ask that now? Is whether you'd like the strategy in advance, so you've got time. You haven't just got a week; you've got a bit longer to have a look at it, and you know. But we can come back to that. So this slide just shows you that in stark reality, really. I like this slide because it makes it really clear where you're supposed to prioritise domestic space, heating and water essentially. I'll just leave that up there for you just to sort of absorb it really. Okay, right. So that's emissions. Are you happy for me to move on to core principles? So the core principles are going to, they loosely pick up on sustainable goals as laid out by the UN and just really are essentially good practice in terms of delivering a climate change strategy. And we'll be looking at a similar set of core principles to the economic strategy. They're not the objectives, they're how, the behaviours that we use, I suppose, or the behaviours that we employ to make sure that the strategy is delivered the best way it can be. So that's through increasing collaboration and cooperation. So this isn't our strategy, it's bringing as many people on as possible to encourage changes to the way that people live and behave. Adapting to change, that's a bit about taking every opportunity we can from the emerging policy, from the different trials that are going on, from the climate change itself, so the adaptation plans that we need to put in place, so that we make sure that we work at pace really to deliver the scale of the challenge and being pragmatic. So focus on what we need to reduce emissions rather than necessarily getting sidetracked. Building inclusive, healthy and sustainable communities is actually about recognising that different communities have different requirements. This is where climate justice comes in. So making sure that we understand the impact of fuel poverty, etc., on people of lower incomes, and we don't expect everyone to behave the same based on adapted to their circumstances. Creating new employment and investment opportunities, that's very much picking up on the green skills, the conversation that we had earlier, particularly around retrofit, circular economies and things like that, but also actively seeking new funding streams and attracting new investment. And that, again, is an opportunity for us to get to net zero 2030, because we don't know what new government schemes are coming up and what new programs they'll allow us to bid for. And then finally, good governance, just so that we publish the emissions data, we share our plans, we share the evidence base, we use that as a framework to encourage residents and businesses and anchor institutions to all act and point in the same direction, so that we all can take progressive steps to reduce and meet net zero. Just hold it there. Is there any questions around principles?
One thing that occurs to me here and going through it there is that something that in the time I've been a councillor has frustrated me is the, we'll say inability, I don't know if that's the right word, of local authorities to work together on procurement, on exchange of expertise, on a whole variety of things, rather than just going it alone. And I've seen numerous examples of local authorities where joint procurement has unlocked things that would be totally impossible for an individual local authority. And so as we think about this, and we think about devolution and the emergence of a new structure next to us in North Yorkshire and the opportunities that that will present, it would be nice to think that the core principles incorporated a declaration to work with other local authorities, as well as to just kind of rely on ourselves.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We'll put that in number one, collaboration and cooperation. Yeah, thank you. Any happy for me to move on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the next thing we want to show is stakeholder perspectives. First of all, a big thank you to all of the different partners, businesses and stakeholders that took part in these conversations. I'll just tell you, I've written down somewhere the ones that took place. Here we go. So we had different partners representing building and construction, transport, waste, commercial and industrial, natural environment and energy. Quite understandably, they match up to and marry up to the emissions. So you can see there's a direct correlation to those sort of higher emissions having dedicated sessions about. It's worth noting, of course, these are not council views. These are a summary of our partners' stakeholders and the people that took place in the round table conversations, run like workshops by an independent facilitator, and just really picking up on things that covered technical barriers, challenges, opportunities, policy, financial, community and delivery. Shall I just walk through them? So there's buildings, there's transport. Hopefully people have had the opportunity to look at these prior to this. Waste, commercial and industrial, natural environment, energy, and that's it. So just to remind you, these aren't residents, these are partners, anchor institutions or businesses representing each of those different areas. And then finally, case studies.
Can I
oh, sorry, yes.
just say something quickly at that point, because something that struck me when I was reading these are the kind of points that we've made around this table are not represented here. So I think I can agree with the concept that gas is too cheap, but at the same time, we all know that gas is now becoming hugely more expensive. And this was probably collected before that happened. But if we continue down that trajectory, then it becomes more and more important to make the statements about climate justice and fuel poverty. And this stakeholder perspective, if it's contained within our strategy, might be interpreted as being the council's view. So I'd be keen to hear from you, Claire, as to how we can ensure that these are given a context that doesn't allow them to become a pretext for other people to say, oh, the council thinks that then. Because I think most of us around this table would be quite alarmed at the idea of just having a bald statement that gas is cheap and leaving it at that.
Yeah, that's a fair challenge. We're not publishing those stakeholder comments in the climate change strategy.
Right,
they're part of what's helped shape it. But we will be publishing them alongside the outcome, the output of our big conversation, the resident feedback, alongside the focus groups that are taking part now, and alongside the technical annexes that basically are the data behind the emissions and all of the different evidence base that led to this, because it's part of the whole piece of work that led to the climate change strategy itself.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I'm really keen on is that we only have one climate change strategy, so that we don't think, well, next year, let's just do another one.
Yeah.
Because actually there's a whole bank of evidence that got us to this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, I've stated it before, that my aim is that all the parties are able to agree to this strategy so that the whole city going forwards knows what it's about for the next decade.
Yeah.
So we've got to make sure that we address that. And this might seem like a silly anecdote, but I've learnt in the past 2 weeks in relation to the cost of energy, some information that I found very interesting and challenging, that if you compare 2021 with 1821, the cost of lighting a room has decreased by 3,000 times. And that's part of the context of why we are where we are, is that we've become so used to energy being incredibly cheap that to create the same amount of lumens in a room in 1821 cost 3,000 times more than it does today. And that's part of the context of what you could call the profligacy of the fossil fuel age. And it's part of what we're having to deal with. So I just offer it as this is just as part of how this whole thing, it's just when I saw the words gas is too cheap, it triggered a load of thoughts that I'm sure many members of the public will be startled by. Sorry.
Thank you. No, thank you.
I just had to declare an interest. Sorry, I didn't do this at the beginning, but the 4th case study, I'm a volunteer organizer, manager of that project. Non-prejudicial interest.
Yeah, thank you. So I was actually going to do the same, actually, Councillor. So because we have a series of case studies, I'm hoping you've had the opportunity to read them. Just to go back to the beginning, we've got University of York, which plays a massive role and is one of our key anchor institutions, is a real active member on the Climate Commission, as well as Sustainability Leads Group. So real trusted friend, doing all sorts of different projects, and of course has a very active and interested student base. E-mobility trial, so that's the Tia scooter trial that you'll see in the city that has been really successful and has been extended. York Gin, again, a local small medium enterprise that are doing all sorts of different things to become more sustainable. Real Junk Food Project, just to mention really on behalf of Council, Councillor, that we got your comment about updating this just after it'd gone live. So I don't know if you want to draw that out now or just note it for reference.
Just for the, people's education about food waste.
Yeah.
So where is it? Third paragraph at the very end of the first line, it says donated items of food are used in the pay as you feel cafe and store. And the misconception is that shops donate things and it's charity, and that's not the case. They are passing on their waste or surplus food. Organisations like the Real Junk Food Project intercept waste food from going in the bin and causing harmful emissions. So, and it maddens me when the shops celebrate, which of course all organisations do, and we should thank them for celebrating their contribution to reducing their carbon emissions. But the volunteers are really mopping up a lot of the mess that supermarkets create. So we don't like to consider the food as donated. We are reusing it in the most climate resilient way.
Thank you. Thank you. York Community Woodland, we're really proud of this project. This is a council-run project. It was talked about in COP26. It's just had champion city status as from the Queen's Jubilee. So again, lots of good stories coming out of the woodland and really well received. Forestry England comment about delighting to work with us, and you'll see much more about the woodland coming out over the months ahead. EV hyper hubs. So this is there's two, one at Monk's Cross and one at Poppleton Bar. They're just being launched for the public so that the public can start charging up when they pop to the shops, or whatever they do up in those different park and ride sites. And that's it, I think. My button doesn't work anymore, Richard. So
on the case studies, pardon me, Claire, is it? Well, firstly, I'm hoping that when they're in there, there'll be loads of fantastic photographs.
Yeah.
But that's a minor point. But the second thing is, how do we encourage, or are we already doing it, community groups and others to volunteer case studies to us? Because if we want this to be seen as an inclusive document and strategy going forwards, I think it's important that we enable people to volunteer case studies, and that when this appears also, I'm thinking as a digital document, which it no doubt will, that while a printed document may have half a dozen case studies, online, there's surely potential for any strategy and case studies to contain many more examples that help to nurture that idea that across the whole city, different people with different backgrounds are contributing to this, rather than it being a corporate thing that we're kind of controlling from the centre. So, or just, a handful of businesses. It's how we get that input. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I think that's a really good shout, and that is definitely something we could look at doing, actually. So I'm coming on to my last item with how we're going to engage residents and to refine the strategy. And we can do that shout out during that process, but also when it's, like you say, when it's gone live, give an opportunity through some sort of online magic to collect case studies as we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So are you happy for me to move on to the next item, or do you want to? Yeah,
unless there are any points. So yes,
Sorry.
Councillor Owen, yes.
The electric vehicle hyper hubs, are they actually working now? There did seem to be a very large delay in the Monk's Cross park and ride.
I can't talk to Monk's Cross, but I know Poppleton is
Is it not within the
It's within
testing
our-
zone? The COVID,
The Popperton Bar one?
is it, are they actually available to members of the public?
This is a really good question. I'll have to find that out for you. Can I take
I
that
think
away?
they're not available, and the Monk's Cross one has
Still isn't
never
available.
actually been connected up to the
It-
grid.
I need to check that one because it was due to be launched. So let me take that away.
Yeah, it would be good to know that they're actually open. They weren't when I went filming there, but then that was about 5 months ago, so.
I can find out by looking online, actually.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't want to be in a strategic document right now. But I mean, at the end of the day, we just want to see them working. Yeah. So the last bit of this.
It looks like it is open, the one at Monk's Cross. Yeah. So the last agenda item, second to last agenda item, is the CDP snapshot, which a member of the public spoke about earlier today. Just to give you a little bit of background. So the CDP report card from 2021 gave us a B, as you can see. B is management level. There's 2 levels below that, which is awareness, a C, and disclosure, a D, and one level above, which is the leadership, which is scoring band A. Management level, B, means that we understand the main risks and impacts and are taking action to adapt to and reduce the effects of. We are working collaboratively with stakeholders to understand their risks and impacts with their plans in place. And the next step is to move from management to leadership scoring band by defining the ambitious but realistic goals and demonstrating we are on track to achieve these goals. You'll note on the report that we are actually an A for adaptation and a C for mitigation. So an A in adaptation means we are both higher than the region, which was scored B, and higher than globally, which is scored D. And for mitigations at C, we are the same as the region, which also scored C, but still higher than globally at D, which evens out at B. We are obviously committed to getting ourselves up to the leadership level of A. We believe that when we publish the climate change strategy in July, that will shift it all up because our plans will be more visible. And we'll continue to work with CDP to make sure that we stay on track to get a really good score, because obviously there's an awful lot of work going on and a real strong commitment to be best in class, if you like. Anybody got any questions about CDP?
Yeah, Councillor Melly.
I think that what the public speaker was talking about was, rather than looking at the whole city, being able to look more closely at different parts of the city and what emissions are in different areas and what the source of those emissions are, and doing kind of heat mapping of the city. Is that right? I'm just wondering, is that sort of heat mapping going to be possible given the £100,000 cut to the carbon reduction budget, or is that something that's going to have to be dropped?
So ward emissions don't come into this snapshot report. That's a separate thing. But picking up on good self, we do have the ward emission data. We also are using that and working with that for local area energy planning. So actually that will give us an idea, not just so much of what the data is, but what we can do about it. And what I'll do is, once we've got that, we'll look at working with ward councillors around what we're published and what we can do with that information. Because one of the kind of ambitions and part of the principles around the climate change strategy itself is to share the information we've got, share the plans that we can put in place to kind of as a mechanism to improve and encourage action. So we can't do everything, but if we can tell people what the evidence base is and show them what they can do about it, hopefully that will help kind of unlock some of that activity. Does that help?
Extraordinarily, yes.
Yes, I think the data I referred to was local super output area data, which is much finer than ward data, which is very interesting. The other thing to say is, I know it's a very difficult area, but the scatter data only counts a small proportion of our carbon emissions. And the climate change emergency, as passed by the council, specified consumption emissions, which are more than twice the scatter emissions according to the data I've seen. And it will be very helpful to see other sources of data other than scatter put in. I'm hesitant to say this, but Greta Thunberg referred to the emissions that the business department were pushing as, well, she said it's a lie that we're a climate leader, which she didn't actually say. Anyway, you can look it up yourself. But I think things are much worse, and we ought to be telling people just what the true situation is, which is much worse than what Scatter and friends say.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I imagine what you've just said about consumption actually also relates to scope 3 emissions primarily. And that's part of the challenge is how do we move on? And as the council's representative on the North Yorkshire Pension Fund, I know that that issue is one that the pension fund and the pension pool are beginning to wrestle with, and institutional investors are beginning to wrestle with. But the data collection is very complex, and your point is well made. The focus is where it is now, but I do understand why you've said what you said. The only thing I'd say add to what you've said about this CDP snapshot is that it is part and parcel of us signing back up to being members of the Covenant of Mayors. And I don't feel disheartened when a member of the public says, but you're only doing this, and it shows that. That's exactly what it's meant to do.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, and I welcome that. And I welcome the fact that the Covenant of Mayors represents nearly 10,000 cities across Europe and the UK and the rest of the world. And similar to what you said earlier, Claire, the value of one of the charts you showed us was that it could be used as a comparator with other local authorities. And I think it is to the advantage of the city that we're using a model that enables us to compare ourselves with other people, because the risk otherwise is that you just do some stuff and flatter yourselves, you're all great, and never have a comparator to enable you to put it into context. So this is very much work in progress. I understand one of the next steps we've still got to do is to produce a sustainable energy action plan, because that's a requirement of being a member of the Covenant of Mayors. And my anticipation is that agreeing a climate strategy and a zero carbon pathway will be part and parcel of being able to assemble that sustainable energy action plan that can then be compared with other cities across our continent. And I think that will be a good thing. And I think it will help us better understand the sustainable energy action plans that other cities have produced, because we'll have a context that enables us to understand how much work goes into it and how the ideas that are being implemented elsewhere can be incorporated into our own work in this city.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I welcome the existence of this, even though it shows us that, you know, it's work in progress.
Yeah.
That's what we expect, and I hope that we kind of persist and get further up the pole very quickly. Are there any other comments on this chart? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Just to echo what you've said, I think it's really quite promising, a lot of the, well, just the data and where we've got to. So thank you. But to acknowledge the comments about scope 3 and the underlying picture of emissions that are far beyond scope 1 and 2, we should address that at every opportunity. And maybe we could suggest that at our April meeting, we have more of time for a discussion on that.
Yeah, no, that might be a good idea. Yeah, if that's all the comments people have. I mean, I'm reminded, because we're back in a room now and having a physical meeting that we didn't really have for 2 years, of where we've come in that 2 years, even though we've only been meeting as two-dimensional objects on screens. But I suspect that in March 2019, the ambition was high and the understanding was quite low. And now we're faced with the seriousness of our situation. But at least compared to where we were 3 years ago, this local authority is beginning to grapple with the scale of the challenge. And that's the first step towards addressing it. But I don't think we're under any illusions, certainly around this table, as to the scale of the challenge we face. So thank you for that. And as Rosie says, thank you to officers for the work that's been done, because we've all been working hard on this for a long time. So is Annex D a separate
Yeah, final
bit of
paper.
this? So you want to just do this final one?
So I've
Yes.
sort of mentioned this before, actually, so I'll be very quick. We're taking a sustainable development approach to developing 3 strategies: the climate change strategy, the economic strategy, and the health and wellbeing strategy. So the three pillars, if you like, of sustainable development. The health and wellbeing strategy is on its own path because it is part of the Health and Wellbeing Board, which is a statutory requirement of the board itself. Although they're hoping to have an outline ready for the July full council, so that we can see the interdependencies between the 3 strategies. Because in a normal world where you weren't placemaking, you'd probably have one strategy. But given the scale of the challenge in each of those 3 different areas, we've got 3 strategies, but they're all massively interrelated. Oops, my report won't go down. No. Excuse me, what's I fiddle about? So essentially, by taking a sustainable development approach, we're literally doing enough for all forever. So it's worth remembering that. That means that we are aligning how we are going through a quite rigorous engage, refine process throughout April and June. And we are really looking forward to, as I hope you all are, Scrutiny playing an active role in that in your April meeting, where we will bring you the full draft strategy, both draft strategies, economic and climate change, to give you an opportunity to really get under the skin as part of that refinement process. At the same time, we will be engaging residents through focus groups. They are particularly the seldom heard voices, so NEETs, for example, younger people, different ethnicities who didn't typically engage in our big conversational attitudinal survey. So we're going through quite targeted focus groups. And then at the same time, we will have a more broadcast approach to an online survey, inviting people to provide comment and, as you suggest, case studies. That will give us a plan of essentially draft for consultations going to executive on the 21st of April, with climate change scrutiny on the 8th of April, so an opportunity to refine prior to that process. After that, we'll be inviting residents, partners, stakeholders, businesses, everybody to comment. Then on the 23rd of June, executive will, well, we hope they will, executive will be invited to recommend to council the adoption of the both strategies on behalf of the city. And then finally, on the 14th of July, we will invite council to adopt the strategies on behalf of the city for the decade ahead, essentially. So quite a major piece of work to bring these the strategies both together and to align the process to refine them through that vigorous engagement process over April, June, of which you play an active part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
And as you've been speaking there, and the discussion we had just a few moments ago, it does occur to me that I certainly wasn't thinking of this when we were discussing the economic strategy. But can you perhaps, Claire, liaise with the economic strategy team to get them to look to whether mention can be made in the strategy, and I think it ought to be, to the role of the future economy of York getting to grips with scope 3 and consumption. because in Iceland, they grow their own bananas. And I'm not talking about the shop, I'm talking about the country. They've got to grips, they're lucky, they've got geothermal energy coming out of their ears. But they are transforming what we understand by agriculture and food production, as are the Netherlands, who I think are the third biggest food producer in the world. I think there was some mention of biotech, but I think it might be helpful, and I'm glad to have had the prompt from Jeff as a member of the public. It might be helpful for that document to overtly make a statement about how we're going to feed ourselves in the future if we're going to reduce those carbon emissions. And I think maybe the economic strategy is the place where that needs to be, so that we can focus resources and education and skills, whatever, to getting there. I don't know what others around the table think of that. We're not seeing dissenting voices.
Yeah, happy to take that point. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it would be a useful, because it wasn't in there,
No.
and I think it should be in there.
Yeah.
Are there any other thoughts on the publishing the strategy and the sequence of it? Are we all kind of tired out after 2 hours of this? Yes, Councillor.
I would like to echo what Councillor Baker said earlier about, it's a climate emergency. We want this strategy in place as soon as possible and making sure that nothing delays it. Like if it's not quite ready enough to go to executive in June, does that mean it can't come to council in July? Or if the economic strategy isn't ready in time, does that mean the climate strategy can't be done at the same time? And so is there anything that could delay it that you've kind of foreseen and are trying to avoid?
Yeah, so we have to go to July. We have to get it adopted in July, because the climate change strategy and the economic strategy set out our ambition for the next 10 years. And then in, fingers crossed, August, September time, we'll be coming out to consult residents on a devolution deal, which will tell us a mechanism by how we will measure and deliver some of that ambition. So we need residents to essentially champion, agree, advocate, refine, whatever they need to do around the ambition before we can say, well, this is a mechanism by which we can then deliver on that ambition. So we are the whole kind of schedule for this coming year around major consultations is to get us to a point of a devolution deal that is endorsed by residents. But to do that, we first need to understand what the ambition is for the city. So we have to get to July.
Good.
It's as simple as that, really.
Well, we're behind you, I think, is the message.
Yeah, thank you. Which comes on to my point earlier, really, about I'm happy to give you all sight of the strategy as soon as possible. Even if we don't discuss it until the meeting in April, it gives you ample opportunity collectively, however you want to sort of, unpick it, throw rocks at it, whatever you need to do so we can get it where it needs to be.
That would be good, thank you. So now I think we'll call that an end to that item. So thank you very much for that. We're now into the work plan and what we're doing in April. So I need to add to that, just ask Robert where we are. We've invited Matthias to come and address us as the new chair of the Climate Commission. And I think we're trying to arrange a date with him. Do we have an agreement yet for April?
So from what I understand, they're not working on the day of the 12th, but their assistant is still sort of double checking if they might be able to join us via Zoom. So I'm just waiting on that. Okay.
Because we'd said it would be good to actually have a report from the chair of the Climate Change Commission. Now Paula has handed it over so we can get a sense of what's happening and what their plans are.
I mean, it's a bit cheeky, but if possible, could we look at the work plan to be as much around the climate change strategy as possible?
Yes.
Yeah, and so I know there's 4 other items. I wonder if we could look at moving those so that you've got a really good time to get under the skin of it, because it is quite a big document, actually.
Yeah. So how we finalise getting to see the Climate Commission would be good. I mean, I want to make sure we do that because it's long overdue. But we'll liaise, if everyone's happy, we'll liaise and try and kind of work out how much we think is digestible at the next meeting so that and then maybe we just have to bring a load of cakes or something to get us through it.
Yeah, chocolate required. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's covered everything that I was hoping we'd cover. Thank you very much to everyone for your contributions.
Thank you.
And let's keep at it.